सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग्स से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
It's what the Americans would call the third rail of politics, but what we in India would call, I think, the nuclear option. For Indian politics and Indian politicians, the Uniform Civil Code has always been the nuclear option. Why nuclear option? Well, because if you launch that particular nuclear strike, there's bound to be a huge impact, but there's also bound to be a fallout, and that fallout could last for generations. First of all, why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about this because though we've been talking about it since 1947, 1950, it's never really seemed like a real thing. It's never really seemed like something people would do. But now, judging by the way the BJP is gearing up for the next election, I think it might happen. Or if it doesn't happen, they will certainly give the impression that it will happen. If you listen to what the Law Commission said when it said it wanted to reopen the debate on the Uniform Civil Code, and more significantly, if you listen to what the Prime Minister said in Bhopal earlier this week when he talked about the Uniform Civil Code, how we needed it, how other opposition parties like the Congress were opposing it because of vote bank politics, it seems to me that they're gearing up to do something with this nuclear option. But first, a little bit about why we need or we don't need a uniform civil code. When the Constitution was being framed, there were many personal laws that differed from religion to religion. Many people who framed the Constitution and participated in the debates in the Constituent Assembly that led to the formation of this Constitution said, I think correctly, that you have to have one law in a secular country. There has to be one criminal law, there has to be one personal law. A situation where Muslims got married one way and then inheritance, adoption, divorce was subject to one set of laws, and where Hindus, Christians, Sikhs got married in different ways no longer made any sense. It's one nation, it should have one law. Besides, we were calling ourselves a secular country. We were saying that religion had no place in governance. And yet, if you made laws based on religion, weren't you in a sense going against the spirit of secularism? This was the position of many liberals, notably B.R. Ambedkar and Jawaharlal Nehru, but they were opposed very strongly from all sides by conservatives, by Hindu politicians, by Muslim politicians. The argument of the Hindus was strong enough, which is that we've always lived this way, we've always had these policies, we've always had these laws. Who are you to come along and change them? One particular case, which I think evoked some debate and aroused some emotion, was the issue of polygamy. Hindus were allowed then to keep more than one wife. During the debates of the Constituent Assembly, many of the framers of our Constitution said this is absurd, we should have the same laws as the rest of the West. It was opposed, and it kept being opposed till the 1950s when the government finally banned polygamy among Hindus. I think it was 1955 or 54 that that law was passed. In the case of Muslims, the issue was more complicated. The framers of the Constitution had the formation of Pakistan and the horrors of partition in front of them. Pakistan was telling Indian Muslims that because they had chosen to stay on in India, they'd actually turned their back on their religion, that India would be a Hindu-dominated country and they would lose their religious identity. It was argued then to change Muslim personal law would be to lend substance to the Pakistani view. The Muslims should have a right to their own personal laws. You can argue about that, but it was, I think, a pretty compelling argument at the time, compelling enough for Nehru and Ambedkar to change their minds. They didn't change their minds fully, though. They insisted that it was put into the directive principles of the Constitution. Now, directive principles are recommendations for things that should happen. They're not binding on the state. The idea is that we should move in that direction. So it was an uneasy compromise. But the idea, I think, at least then, was that one day India would have one law for everyone. There would be one uniform civil code. That never happened. It never happened for a variety of reasons, but mostly because there was no political will. It also didn't happen because the Muslim clergy and the Muslim leadership took the line that Muslims needed their own personal law, that they were 10-12% of the population in those days, that they were in danger of being swamped by Hindus and Hindu ways. If they were going to maintain their own identity, then they needed their own personal laws. You can argue about this, certainly people did, and people always have. There was a view, and there's been a view for as long as I can remember, that you should have some kind of debate. You should have, following that debate, a uniform civil code that's not a Hindu law or a Muslim law, but one that is created through debate, and that debate includes the Muslim community and gives every Indian the right to the same laws. It's never happened. It's never happened because within the Muslim community, Muslim religious leaders have gone on and on about how Muslim personal law is central to the Muslim identity. It could have been done, I think, by the Congress. The Congress was not perceived as being anti-Muslim. Indira Gandhi could have done it. There could have been debates. There could have been the formulation of a new law. Muslims could have been involved with writing this new law. But nobody ever did it because, as I said, it was the third rail of Indian politics. Nobody wanted to touch it. The BJP, the Jan Sangh, many other parties have always said we need a uniform civil code. But even they put this into their manifestos as one of those things you write but don't do very much about, I suppose, like our directive principles. When the Vajpayee government came to office, when the BJP finally came to office, there were demands from the rank and file that there should be a uniform civil code. The rank and file were told no, the time is not right. Why didn't they do it? Well, they didn't do it because Vajpayee believed, I think, that there would be a huge schism within Indian society. As it is, the BJP was being seen as a Hindu party that represented the interests only of the Hindus, that there would be such a deep social division, perhaps some kind of social war, that the risk wasn't worth taking. When the Congress took over, I think it similarly funked it, but it funked it, I think, also because there was a dispute within the constituents of the coalition, many of whom didn't believe it should be done. The arguments for the formulation of a uniform civil code fall into two basic categories. There are two arguments of varying strength, and there's one realistic qualification. The first argument, and it's an argument that you'll hear again and again, is that Muslim personal law discriminates against women. You can argue whether this is true or not, but certainly many Muslim women felt this as well. In the 1980s, after the Shah Banu judgment, there was a movement even among Muslim women to try and abolish Muslim personal law and have equitable laws that gave Indian Muslims and their women the same rights as, say, Hindus had or women had elsewhere. It's a good argument, but not necessarily a strong one, because if your argument is that Muslim personal law is discriminatory when it comes to women, just amend that law, right? You don't have to abolish it and impose a uniform civil code. It's the second argument that's stronger, and it's a version of that old argument, one nation, one law. We are secular. Should we really be bothering with religious laws? It's an argument that I don't think anybody's ever been able to refute. But there's another realistic qualification, and that's, while it's a good idea in principle, and of course there's an argument to favor it, is it a priority? Should we do it now? Should we risk alienating the Muslim minority? What would we gain? It's a good symbolic measure, but the actual political costs on the ground are enormous. Now, if you talk to liberals, you talk to, say, Ram Guha, or even little liberals like myself, all of us have written asking for a uniform civil code. And we have been countered by the voices of what they call political realism. Even Muslim intellectuals who support liberal principles say it will just do too much damage to the community, don't do it now. Other liberals say, yeah, maybe we should do it, but the time is not right, which of course, according to me, is not a great argument, because the time will be right only if you do it properly. If you have a new kind of assembly that formulates this law, you involve Muslims completely in the formation of this law, I don't think it would be in those cases an insurmountable problem. But hey, what do I know? I'm not in politics. But because it's been the third rail of Indian politics, people have shied away from it. But as I said, it's always been the nuclear option. If you have a communally charged atmosphere and you are portraying this idea of Hindus as victims and Muslims as pampered, frankly, there's not much you can say after 9 years of Narendra Modi. Muslims may be good, may be bad, but they're certainly not pampered under this government. So how are you going to claim that India is a country where Hindus are treated as second-class citizens, where Muslims are appeased, where they're pampered? There are very few issues left. One of them, I imagine, is Muslim personal law. You can say we have to get rid of it because it's a special law that allows these chaps to do whatever they want. And it's a big obsession among Hindu communalists to say, you know, they're allowed to have 4 wives. It's a primitive system. It actually wasn't so primitive till the 1950s when Hindus were also allowed similar provisions. But now that it's only a Muslim thing, it's being called primitive, barbaric, and backward. The other problem, which never seems to end, is the attitude of the Muslim religious leadership. Last year, I think it was, there was a mass gathering of religious organizations in Devband, and they passed a resolution opposing the imposition of a common civil code. I have no problems with that. I have a problem with what they said. They said that Muslim personal law was not the law of man. These were divine laws. These were part of their religious practices, and therefore no man had the right to change that. I mean, that's nonsense, and that's completely unacceptable in a secular country. In India, the Constitution is supreme, not some holy book, and laws are made by men within the confines and the boundaries of the Constitution and with the support of people. You cannot go back to some medieval text and say this was revealed to us by God. And yet, this is what happens. And I think the Muslim minority has come to believe this. It's come to believe that if it is going to retain its identity, it must be a community that has its own personal laws. Now, nobody has actually argued too much with these practical objections. Mr. Modi is, I think, the first person who's taken it on head on. Why is he doing it? Well, he had 9 years. He could have done this debate. He could have discussed ways in which the Constitution would be amended or in the way in which personal law would be changed. He did none of those things. He's just raised it now. So the cynical view, and it's a hard view to object to, is that he's doing it as a build-up to the next general election. I've always believed, and I've said this here, that the next general election will not be fought on development or performance or any of those things. It'll be fought on a Hindutva agenda. There's a big Ram temple coming at Ayodhya. If after that you also have a campaign to impose a common civil code, you will communalize the atmosphere. Hindus will see Mr. Modi as a great Hindu leader, a man who's upholding Hindu civilization values. And the opposition, I think, will walk right into this. It will object to uniform civil code. It will say that Muslims have the right to have 4 wives or pay maintenance according to this code. And Mr. Modi will step back and say, what did I tell you? Muslim vote banks. These chaps are only interested in appeasing Muslims. They're not interested in the greater good of the majority community. In that kind of scenario, where the battle is between Hindus standing up for uniform values and a Muslim appeasing opposition, the BJP is appealing once again to its core voters on something that's worked before, Hindutva. I think that's what's going to happen. The reason why Mr. Modi made this speech in Bhopal is because Madhya Pradesh goes to polls. There's an assembly election coming up there. My guess is he will test this approach in Madhya Pradesh. And if it works, if they win, I think you will see it all over India. But will it work? Hard to say. My guess is that in some states, UP for instance, it will work. It's not difficult to polarize the atmosphere there. Will it work in the rest of India? Is it worth pressing the nuclear button for? I don't know. What I do know is that if he does press that button, we have a long, lonely nuclear winter ahead of us.